Okay, let's dive into this. Typically when a massive superpower rolls in and conquers a new territory, they completely rewrite its culture. It's just how history usually works. But today, in this explainer, we're unpacking a really glaring historical anomaly, Iran. We're going to explore how this one specific identity has outlasted nearly every major empire that's ever tried to erase it. And honestly, understanding this, it's absolutely crucial for understanding the region today.
So let's start by looking at what we call the ancient paradox.
This is a central contradiction that has literally frustrated conquering generals for thousands of years. And the scale of it is just staggering. 11. Not one, not two, but 11 major historical invasions. Just take a second to think about the sheer volume of military force, the unending waves of foreign armies that this single number represents. 11 different times the borders were breached. 11 times the ruling powers were challenged or completely overthrown. Yet it always comes back to our core anchor. 11 invasions, one identity.
You see, there's a really stark contrast at play here. On one hand, you've got this very real, physical vulnerability. The geography and the borders, they were relatively easy to invade and conquer. But on the other hand, you have an absolute cultural impenetrability. It's a massive, almost unbelievable disconnect. The physical land gets taken, sure, but the mindset of the people, it completely refuses to bend. No way.
And that brings us to the actual definition of this ancient paradox. A nation historically susceptible to external military conquest, yet completely resistant to cultural alteration by its conquerors. This exact contradiction right here is the entire foundation we're building on for the rest of this explainer. We're going to see exactly how a place can be repeatedly conquered by the sword, but literally never conquered in spirit.
All right, let's get into the first half of this, easy to invade.
When you look at the map of the region, things move fast, and they move aggressively. Historically, this was a highly accessible landmass. It was a crucial, unavoidable crossroads between East and West. The geography itself basically invited conquering armies right in. Sitting squarely on super lucrative trade routes like the Silk Road made it the prime target for those 11 major historical invasions we just talked about. It was repeatedly breached by global superpowers who just saw an easy open route for their sweeping military campaigns, and they marched right across those borders.
But here's where things start falling apart for those invaders, in what we'll call the crumbling superpowers.
Because, as it turns out, crossing a border and actually holding on to a culture are two entirely different things. Across vast, sweeping separations of time, these massive empires really tried. Back in the 4th century BC, Alexander the Great and the Macedonian Empire swept right through. But get this, Alexander famously ended up adopting Persian dress and customs himself. Then, fast forward over a millennium to the 13th century AD. In comes the devastating Mongol Empire. And even they were absorbed. Mongol rulers eventually converted to Islam and adopted Persian administration systems. Jump ahead again to the 19th century AD with the British Empire. We're talking completely different eras, totally different tactics, but they are all entirely united by one spectacular shared failure: their inability to change the core identity of the nation.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how incredibly ironic the ultimate outcomes are. I mean, the Macedonians, the Mongols, the British, they all pulled off the military conquest. They successfully invaded, but their ultimate fate crumbled to dust. Every single one of these world-dominating global superpowers eventually collapsed into the history books, completely crumbled to dust, while the very identity they tried to erase remained standing strong.
Which brings us to a much more grounded reality, the second half of our paradox: impossible to change.
11 invasions, one identity. I really want to repeat that rhythmic anchor because it is the single most vital takeaway from this explainer. Despite that impossibly long list of fallen empires we just went through, the cultural bedrock completely rejected assimilation. The invaders came, they ruled for a bit, and then they just faded away. So for anyone out there trying to understand modern Middle Eastern geopolitics or Iranian national pride, this is the absolute key. The identity of the invaded never fundamentally shifted.
And the best way to visualize this is through a simple idea: the house still stands.
The house still stands. This quote is honestly the perfect metaphor. Imagine a really sturdy, ancient structure. Over thousands of years, brutal, violent storms are raging around it. The wind is howling, maybe a few windows get shattered by the tempests of the Macedonians, the Mongols, or the British. The house absorbs the storm of countless invasions. But the foundational architecture, the bones of the house, it never moves. The invaders just pass through like bad weather, but the house itself is entirely permanent. So we've seen the geography that practically invites conquest right alongside the cultural bedrock that completely rejects assimilation. And that leaves us with one incredibly profound question. If 11 invasions and the world's absolute greatest empires couldn't alter its foundation, what could ever truly change this indomitable identity? It's a pretty powerful thought to ponder as we look at the macro trends of history. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning the history that builds our world.